On Panorama tonight, an energy scandal involving a notorious businessman. So is Frank Timis corrupt?
In my opinion, the simple answer is yes.
We uncover Frank Timis' secret payments linked to an African president. Do you think this is a suspicious arrangement?
I do find the payment suspicious.
We reveal how his company is getting between $9 and $12 billion from BP.
9 billion? Mm-hmm. Is it true?
And we ask why one of the world's biggest companies signed up to such a suspicious deal.
It's absolutely indefensible that a company like BP should be rewarding somebody like Frank Timis.
Mr. Dudley, I work for BBC Panorama, and we want to know why BP is paying Frank Timis $10 billion. This is Senegal, on the West African coast. Millions of people live in poverty here, but the standard of living could be much higher. This is a country that's rich in natural resources. Large reserves of oil and gas have been discovered here, but some of this wealth has been lost through corruption.
That money should be going to the people of Senegal. The country's natural resources should be going into the state budget to help ordinary people. What's happening is that the nation is being robbed. Countries like Senegal, with huge natural resources, should be profiting directly from those natural resources.
I'm investigating a deal that has cost the Senegalese people billions of dollars. It involves a businessman who was based in London, as well as one of Britain's biggest companies. In 2011, Senegal was handing out 2 exploration concessions for oil and gas. The blocks covered 6,700 square miles off the coast. A major oil company wanted to drill, but at the last minute, the blocks were given to an unknown company instead, Petrotim. It had no track record in offshore drilling.
La société Petrotim, la société qui a finalement été...
The company Petrotim that was eventually chosen shouldn't have benefited from these permits because this company didn't have any experience in the field. Petrotim had no known past or proven expertise of oil research and oil rigs.
De la recherche pétrolière et de l'exploitation pétrolière.
I want to find out more about the mystery company that was given the exploration rights. So I'm looking for its head office. Je cherche une société appelée Petrotim. Ils ont déménagé. So they've left the building. They're no longer there. It looks like there were apartments here. Do you know if there were offices as well? No, it says there's only blocks of flats here. No offices. The 2 offshore concessions were given to a company run from an apartment block. And that's not the only unusual thing about the deal. This is an agreement between the Senegalese government and Petrotim. It's dated the 8th of December 2011, which is a bit odd because Petrotim wasn't actually set up as a company until 6 weeks later. Petrotim was set up by this man, Frank Timis, a Romanian businessman with 2 convictions for supplying heroin in the 90s. He's been involved in a series of failed mining ventures in West Africa.
Has spent over $150 million by building camps, labs, and drilling. I'm proud to say, with excellency, to the government and to the people of Sierra Leone, we'll be announcing the largest magnetite iron deposit on the planet, over 10 billion tons.
Frank Timmis companies have faced many accusations, from bribing politicians to shooting miners.
This is Frank Timmis, the president of Sierra Leone and the president of Burkina Faso.
So it seems he did a lot of work in West Africa.
He does a lot of work in West Africa. He certainly likes to call himself the godfather of West Africa.
Philip Caldwell used to run a secretive offshore trust for Frank Timmis. But he's agreed to talk because he's become concerned about the way Mr. Timmis does business.
He's a character. He doesn't talk about much apart from himself, but I think he could be quite threatening. There was always a concern in my mind that there was a different side to him that you had to be aware of.
Frank Timmis has floated 2 mining companies on the Junior Stock Exchange in London. One was accused of human rights abuses. The other was hit with the exchange's biggest ever fine. Regal Petroleum had told investors it expected to find oil, even though it knew the oil well was dry.
Regal issued several statements that essentially lied to investors about the prospects of finding oil, even after the oil well concerned had been capped and plugged, and they knew full well that they were not going to get any commercial oil from there. It was still telling investors that it would find large amounts of oil.
Mr. Timmis's lawyers say he only held a minority stake and that he was personally investigated and cleared. They also deny that he set up or controlled Petrotim. Now we've obtained new information about Frank Timmis. A hard drive full of leaked documents from inside his business empire. There are thousands of emails, agreements, and contracts on this drive, and they contain information about deals from all around the world. The hard drive also includes information about his personal finances. It reveals Frank Timmis spent £14,000 a month on his luxury London flat. He also spent thousands of pounds at the finest restaurants. But our documents show he didn't always pay much tax. This is what he paid in 2017, just £35.20. The year before, it looks like he didn't pay a single penny in tax.
Any normal member of the public looking at this document and seeing here's a person who's paying total income tax payment for the year £35.20, and then looking at the lifestyle this person is living, there's something wrong. It doesn't fit.
Frank Timmis funded his luxury lifestyle with cash from his offshore trust. Most of the money came in payments called distributions, which should have been taxable. But shortly before submitting his tax return, Frank Timmis asked the trust to change these distributions to loans.
Frank has said that all the payments were loans and not distributions. Please, would the trustees consider rectifying?
The taxable distributions were transformed into non-taxable loans. And a backdated loan agreement was created, so it all looked legitimate. It looks like tax evasion.
It all points to this being a manoeuvre to cheat the taxman. And if that is the case, because it's been done retrospectively, there seems to be prima facie evidence that this is tax fraud, and it should be investigated.
Philip Caldwell ran the trust that helped Frank Timmis dodge tax. He's named as chairman at the meeting that agreed to backdate the suspicious loans.
It has my signature on it, but what I can say is that no such meeting ever took place. I wasn't But I wasn't in Switzerland at the time.
So basically, these are fake minutes for a meeting that never took place?
Correct.
Mr. Timmis's lawyers say the allegations of tax evasion are denied in the strongest possible terms. They say he's fully complied with all of his tax obligations and has taken professional advice to ensure that he's done so. But Philip Caldwell says Frank Timmis was using the offshore trust for dubious purposes. He's particularly worried about that big energy deal in Senegal. Philip doesn't think Petrotim should have been awarded the exploration concessions.
It's very surprising that when there were other British companies, FTSE 250, big, decent-sized companies who'd had success in Africa, were unable to get this concession, and Petrotim was able to get such a large concession. Was set up to go for the concession. It had no history at all.
So should he have got this deal?
In my opinion, no.
In 2012, Senegal elected a new president. Macky Sall promised to fight corruption.
Nous mettrons un terme à la gabegie, à la corruption et ériger un système de gouvernance.
He quickly ordered an investigation into Frank Timmis's deal. It concluded that Petrotim should lose the concessions. But the new president allowed Frank Timmis to keep the 2 blocks anyway. It led to demonstrations in Senegal about the Timmis deal. Protesters claimed that the president's family was cashing in through a company called the Timmis Corporation.
Il y a une société nébuleuse, obscure, qui s'appelle Timmis Corporation, qui a 30% de nos gaz que personne ne connaît. Nous leur demandons de nous dire quels sont les actionnaires de Timmis Corporation. Qu'est-ce que ces gens-là ont fait pour mériter 30% de notre gaz?
The protests were directed at the president's brother, Aliou Sall. He had no experience in the energy industry, but Frank Timmis gave him a top job. Why do you think that Frank Timmis wanted to employ Aliou Sall?
Very simply, because he was the brother of the president, Macky Sall. It's extremely serious, because there's an obvious conflict of interest. It's the president who signs the decree that allows the contract to go ahead, and his brother works in the group that benefits from this contract. It's extremely serious.
Our documents revealed details of Aliou Sall's contract for the first time. Even though he has no previous experience, Aliou Sall is offered the job of Petrotim's country manager in Senegal. But the contract makes it clear there's a condition. Aliou Sall will only get the job if his brother, the president, allows Frank Timmis to keep the valuable concessions. The contract shows the president's brother was paid $25,000 a month for 5 years. That's $1.5 million. Aliou Sall was also promised shares worth $3 million in Frank Timmis companies. We showed the contract to an expert on due diligence and corruption.
The monthly payments of $25,000 for a consultancy, a little surprisingly large for somebody that has no previous experience in that industry. The explanation for which seems to be that it's connected with the confirmation by his brother, the president, of the license blocks.
Do you think this is a suspicious arrangement?
I do find the payment suspicious. The linkage between the two is unmistakable in my view.
We've obtained a contract between Aliou Sall and Frank Timmis. And you can see his monthly salary at the bottom of the contract. Politicians in Senegal haven't seen this document before.
I think it's very clear here that Aliou Sall was involved to convince his brother to sign the decrees and give the blocks to Petrotim. And Petrotim has no technical and financial capacity to get those blocks. That's very clear.
How damning is this for the president's brother and the president himself?
It's so shocking. Because you should know that President Macky Sall came to power under strong commitments of good governance. He just betrayed our hope, and we are definitely shocked on that. It's a shame.
Aliou Sall denies corruption. His lawyers say his payments were in line with other similar roles in the industry. He never received the shares and was engaged for his expertise, and not because he happened to be the brother of President Sall. They also say he never attended any meeting with President Sall about the deal. But we found a document that suggests that's not true. It says Aliou Sall met with his brother to inform him about the application. Frank Timis may have been awarded the concessions, but he didn't start drilling for oil and gas. Offshore exploration is both risky and expensive. Did he have the money at the time to carry out the work that was needed?
No. He was certainly struggling for the sort of money that's needed to get involved in a big project. Even though he was, on paper, worth a lot of money, at this stage he didn't have too much money to put into these companies.
In 2014, an American energy company stepped in.
At Cosmos Energy, we're pathfinders who use a proven industry-leading approach to find oil and gas in frontier and underexplored areas.
Cosmos Energy agreed to finance the exploration. It also lent Timis Corporation cash so Frank Timis could pay a share of the development costs.
Cosmos claims in its policies to only do business with reputable partners. And you cannot say that Frank Timis was a reputable partner. The fact that they financed him completely shows that Frank Timis was nothing but a middleman in this deal. He wasn't going to develop those blocks. He was a middleman, and by going into business with him, it could potentially be providing the final link in a corrupt chain.
Cosmos Energy says it conducted extensive and appropriate due diligence, and that this included multiple interviews with relevant individuals. We've got the notes from those due diligence interviews. So what does our expert make of them?
Those interviews I don't find particularly thorough. It seems to me that what the exercise was about was going through the motions rather than trying to get to the bottom of some of the questions that seemed to me to be undoubtedly raised at that time.
The drilling by Cosmos eventually proved successful. A major gas field was discovered 75 miles off the coast of Senegal.
It's a huge deal. People in the city are very aware that the oil and gas blocks off Senegal and Mauritania are some of the most important in the world. Just one of the wells contains something like 16 trillion cubic feet of gas. This is something that major oil and gas companies really want.
To extract the gas, Cosmos joined forces with one of the world's biggest companies. You might have heard of them.
We are a global energy business with enormous reach across the world's energy system.
BP says it operates to the highest ethical standards, but it was willing to do a deal with Frank Timis. In 2017, BP agreed to buy him out.
The surprising thing to me was that he negotiated himself with BP. Certainly Mr. Timmis was saying that this was a spectacular deal and it was his negotiating skills that managed to get it. But it still strikes me as strange that BP would feel the need to do that.
BP bought Timmis Corporation's remaining stake in these concessions for $250 million. But that's just the start. The real cash comes from the royalties. We've obtained details of the royalties agreement. It's described as the most generous in the industry. Over the next 40 years, BP will pay Timmis Corporation between $9 and $12 billion. These figures have never been made public before. This is some of how much he could earn.
Then he will get $9 billion?
Mm-hmm. He could make, yeah. What do you think about this?
But is it true?
Yes, this is true.
I'm shocked. I'm deeply disappointed that our leaders can accept such deals. $9 billion? Are you sure? There is no reason that such money to be given to Frack Timmis. This is unacceptable, properly unacceptable. I mean, it's revolting. I mean, yes.
BP doesn't even know where all of this cash will end up. The billions of dollars are going to Timmis Corporation. Frack Timmis owns most of the company, so he stands to get most of the cash. But Timmis Corporation has some minority owners too. They're hidden behind secretive offshore companies, and BP has no idea who they are.
The due diligence that BP performed was pretty superficial, because they relied upon due diligence that had been done before, and that due diligence itself was very superficial. So both transactions were undertaken on the basis of inadequate due diligence.
BP says its investment will bring substantial benefits to Senegal, and that it conducted extensive and appropriate due diligence in areas including ethics compliance and anti-corruption. BP rejects any implication that it acted improperly. But our documents show that BP knew about the suspicious payments to the president's brother, and it went ahead with the deal anyway.
It's absolutely indefensible that a company like BP should be rewarding somebody like Frack Timmis, particularly when BP really cannot guarantee that there wasn't bribery involved in the obtention of these blocks in the first place.
BP Chief Executive Bob Dudley won't answer our questions. We want to know why BP agreed to do business with Frack Timmis. So I caught up with him as he arrived at work. Mr. Dudley, I work for BBC Panorama, and we want to know why BP is paying Frack Timmis $10 billion. You knew that he was paying the president of Senegal's brother, so why go ahead with the deal, sir? So is Frack Timmis someone that BP should be doing business with? Mr. Dudley, why won't you answer our questions? Anything to say about this deal, Mr. Dudley? BP says it's committed to transparency about its oil and gas payments, but the company still won't answer our questions about a deal that involved the Senegal's president's brother. Frack Timmis says the gas deal will give Senegal many billions of dollars per annum. He says he invested high-risk pioneer capital and used his expertise to attract major oil and gas players. He strenuously denies corruption. we've discovered a payment that looks like a bribe. This is an email sent to Frank Timmis's offshore trust. It says tax is due to the Senegalese government and that Frank Timmis would like $250,000 to cover it. But our documents show the cash doesn't go to the government. It goes to a private company. And we've discovered that company is owned by Aliou Sall. Another $250,000 has been secretly paid to the president's brother.
Okay, we have a company that seems to belong unmistakably to Monsieur Aliou Sall. He seems to be the recipient of the transfer, the $250,000, which is odd because it's described as a tax. And he is, as far as I know, a private citizen, although his brother is now the president of Senegal. It looks like a bribe.
Frank Timmis's lawyers deny he paid a bribe. They say no money was ever transferred from Timmis Corporation to Agritrans Sall, and that we've seen an incorrect ledger entry which was later corrected. But the ledger we've seen is from 2017, 3 years after the $250,000 payment, and it hasn't been corrected. We've also seen company accounts that show the suspicious payment was made to Aliou Sall's company. So is Frank Timmis corrupt?
In my opinion, on what I've seen in the last certainly 2 or 3 years, the simple answer is yes. Someone like that shouldn't be allowed to continue. Should people like Timmis, do they do any particular good? The answer is no.
There's no doubt he's been involved in some highly suspicious payments. So isn't it time that Frank Timmis and the BP gas deal were investigated?
I do think that there are sufficient questions aroused by the documents that I've seen to require an investigation.
The UK needs to make sure that it's policing the financial sector properly. We can't become complicit in the looting of the poorest countries on earth.
Our evidence suggests the people of Senegal have been cheated out of billions of dollars.
There's no way we can accept this kind of deal here in Senegal. That money belongs to us.
It's Frank Timmis who's getting that money. And it's BP who has helped him to cash in.
From the science to the potential.